I counted 4 endings. There may have been more endings. I've never been able to follow completely the plot of any Andy Sidaris movie. However, this one comes closest to because it was basically snakes, drugs, and diamonds. And so, well, give me a little background in what it was like filming a Sidaris movie, an Andy and Arlene Sidaris movie in 1987.
First of all, it was the first independent film that I'd ever done. I'd worked at Universal. I produced Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew, from the sublime to the ridiculous. So we get over to Maui, and Andy says, Molokai, don't worry about unions or permits or anything. And Sunday morning, we were going to have our first day of filming, and there's the union guy, 2 union guys, and their lawyer. So that was stunning. Uh, and I had two of our friends. One was a guy I grew up with who built non-union clubs in New York City, and the other one was a lawyer who was Harvard Law. I learned more from my friend from Brooklyn than anybody ever before or since, and he had them laughing. And then when we got to Honolulu, they sent us a platter of sushi, and they were just great to us. From then on, they were wonderful. From my Brooklyn pal.
Now, for those of you who don't know the background of Andy Sidaris, he is among sports directors. He is a legend. He invented many of the techniques that are used today in sports. He was the genius behind the greatest shots in ABC's Wide World of Sports. He created modern what's considered the modern way to cover college football. He did all this stuff that made him a very popular and highly desirable director all over the world, and had probably the greatest contract of any director in sports. And then he wanted to make these movies.
Yes.
Now, tell me what was Andy's motivation in terms of um, turning movie director. Even while he was still working at ABC, they were still calling him back to do the Olympics and things like that.
Oh, right. Well, when Cap Cities bought ABC, he said, this is the beginning and the end, because Roone Arledge was very supportive of all the directors and all the equipment and all that. And then Cap Cities came in and started cutting back on travel and cameras, and he said, no, this is not for me. He was the first person to take the camera off the field to cover all the women. But he actually had a journalism degree, and it was about telling the whole story, not just what was happening on the field. And he loved, beautiful women, beautiful men, beautiful explosions. So that was it.
Yeah, in the sports field, Andy invented what's called the honey shot, and that's where you do a close-up, but you scope out the cheerleaders before the game, and you pick out the hottest cheerleader and the most expressive cheerleader, and you have your cameraman keep going back to her to make her a star during the course of the game. The honey shot became so common that eventually it was considered so sexist that they made the director stop doing it. However, anybody who was directing sports in the 60s and 70s remembers Andy as that guy. And Andy was also the guy, correct me if I'm wrong on this story, but he couldn't go back to Buffalo because he once said, I couldn't find a single good-looking woman in Buffalo.
Well, no, he said that's how the city got its name, because of the cheerleaders. He didn't think. Yeah, he was
Okay.
opinionated.
So how did you choose the girls? Where did you find the girls?
From Playboy. We had a relationship with the Playboy people, and they would we couldn't use them until they had been centerfolds 2 years after they had become the centerfolds. But the day that we were casting, I'm looking down, and Cynthia Brimhall comes into the room, and I looked up and I went, she was just dazzling. They were
Who plays
really
Edie?
beautiful.
Cynthia Brimhall
Yes,
plays
yes,
Edie,
yes,
right?
yes, yeah. Tall, beautiful, great girl. Yeah, she's selling art, fine art now in Houston.
Now, Donna Spear was she? She was the star of this movie and some
Yeah,
other
yeah,
movies that you
8.
made.
Uh-huh.
So eight of the movies Donna
Mm-hmm.
stars in.
Uh-huh.
What was it about Donna Spear that made her the most your favorite girl?
Are you kidding? Well, she was just very physical. I mean, other than being really beautiful, but she could run and shoot, and that was how during the casting, the girls would have to come to our house and run around and show us how they could fight and how they could shoot, and that's how they got not so much script reading.
Now, how do these things end up in the movies like random sumo wrestling?
It was
The
Andy's.
scenes that just come out of nowhere.
Yeah, out of that, that stocky man's head. He just had an
So he actually,
imagination.
it wasn't like he just stumbled on that
Oh
in
no
the
no no
island.
no
He
no
actually
no.
wrote that in the script and said, let's hire
Absolutely.
two sumo wrestlers.
Right,
Okay.
right. Yeah, he did. Let's find the sumo wrestlers, and just everything just came out of that mind.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
He was fun to live with. I'll tell you that.
so most of the movies, if I remember correctly, were filmed either in Hawaii. Probably most of the shots in all your movies were filmed in Hawaii or Louisiana.
Shreveport, Louisiana, doubled as Molokai.
Okay. So were there
Dallas.
Shreveport shots in this movie?
No, not this one. But
Okay.
in Fit to Kill, for sure, and Return to Savage Beach. Big,
Okay.
Most of it was in Shreveport, Louisiana.
And that's because Andy was from Shreveport,
Yes,
Louisiana,
yes,
right?
yes. Oh, and they were so receptive and so helpful to us. It was amazing.
And then Las Vegas was also used sometimes,
We
right?
did. Yes, we did go to Las Vegas. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, what was the? I also remember that Andy would complain about the fact that when his movies showed on Showtime or one of the premium cable channels, the 9 o'clock movie would be some big blockbuster, from Paramount or Universal or somewhere, and his Hard Ticket to Hawaii would be the 11 o'clock movie. And I can attest to this because I had a cable show at the time. It would get 6 or 7 times the rating of the 9 o'clock big budget movie. And Andy was always perturbed because he would say, "Well, pay me what you're paying the 9 o'clock movie," and they never would. It was always considered like a throwaway, late night.
Right, or early in the morning. I mean, they
yeah.
did start scheduling the movies in the middle of the night, and then the ratings would show up, and then they'd start to program them earlier and earlier. And one season, they were scheduled against each other from HBO and Showtime. And once we had a deal with Showtime, and they said, "Don't worry about it. We're not going to tell Andy Sidaris how to make an Andy Sidaris film." And then they asked to see a rough cut. Well, that's the kiss of death right there. And then they tried to change it, so we gave them their money back.
Oh, wow.
We did. We did.
Well,
Yeah.
good for you. Now you didn't have your usual cast of villains in this one, but you had Rodrigo Obregon in one of the probably strangest roles of his life. Can you talk about that?
Yes, because there were 11 of the movies that we made together, and Rodrigo was in every single one except he came back. He was from Colombia, and he had gone there. He was actually fighting in the army, and he came back to Los Angeles, and we had already started filming, but there was one role that had not yet been cast, and that was Large Marge. So we got him a pair of size 10 high heels and a skirt and a wig, and he was Large Marge. That was it.
And was a very effective woman, I thought.
Oh, very. He was an actor.
Okay, and where did you find Ron Moss?
He was an out of work actor, and after Hard Ticket, he was in The Bold and the Beautiful for years and years, and since then he's been touring with his band. I just got a note. He married Devin DeVasquez. They didn't meet through us exactly, but she was in Guns. They met. They fell in love. They got married, and they were in Europe touring with his band, and they'll be coming back soon.
And were the Can you give us an update on the other actors like Donna Spear and Hope Marie Carlton? And
Hope Marie Carlton. Hope Marie Carlton. Now,
she
don't
was the
tell-
second female lead.
Don't tell this to anyone. She, she had a little work done, and she was going to be cast. And we had lunch one day, and she said I almost fell in love with her myself. She said, but I'm not going to do any nudity in this film. I said, well, you can not do nudity in somebody else's film, and then we recast Roberta Vasquez, and that was the end of Hope.
Oh, that's
For
why
us.
that's why Hope is not in the later films.
That's right.
She decided she didn't want to do nudity.
Right. And actually, Roberta Vasquez was originally supposed to be cast with Donna for the first film, but she got pregnant, so she couldn't work. But then by the time Hope Marie had elevated herself into this new role, Roberta was ready, and so she did the last few films.
There's a jacuzzi scene in every Andy Sidaris movie.
Yes, there is.
At least one.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes more than one, right?
Yes.
Did he get down in the jacuzzi with the camera, or?
No, no need to.
Okay. There's also many types of aircraft, three-wheelers, motorcycles, all kinds of vehicles.
Yes.
What's the story on that?
Well, he was an action guy. That's it. I mean, he just liked all that action with all sorts of vehicles and planes and everything.
Did he blow them up?
Oh yeah, whenever possible. Yeah,
Yeah.
Sure.
It must have been a fun environment, though, to work on those movies.
It was. We didn't always agree, but it was fun.
What's a
and
typical?
that was the thing. We self-finance. We put our house up as collateral, and so it was just the two of us. We didn't have to go to anybody for approval for anything. We just had to, just figure it out between us. The first film, we nearly killed each other.
Is that Seven, the first film?
No. I didn't know. No, that was Hard Ticket. That was
Okay.
the first film that we did together, because prior to that I was doing Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, and he was doing sports, but he had done Seven. I didn't do that, and he had done Malibu Express, and I didn't produce that. But then we got together. Well, we were going. He had some pre-licensing, but it wasn't enough, and the bank said you need collateral, and he said, well, it'll be our house, and I said, well, if it's going to be our house, I'm going to be writing the checks. That's how we got into business together. So it was a little tense, but then after that first film, we really did get along, and we really did have fun. It was a good partnership.
Well, one thing I can say about an Andy Sidaris film is there are certain filmmakers that if you come into the middle of the film, if the film is on late night TV and you come into the middle of the film, you've never seen the film before, and you can just tell in the first 1 minute of the style of the film who made it. You can tell that with Quentin Tarantino. You can tell that with Larry Cohen, if you guys know the Larry Cohen films, and you can definitely tell that with an Andy Sidaris film. It's a distinctive style that he created, and the remarkable thing about his films is they're so beautiful, and some of those shots. I mean, I don't know how he did those aerial shots, but those were just stupendous.
Yeah, there was a small aircraft company that flew between Honolulu and Molokai, and they helped us enormously. But they really got pushed out of business by the bigger companies. But they would do the planes would go up, and the girl would one of our girls would be on one side, and then the pilot would be on the other side with a wig, so just in case there was any thing. And then they would change them over, so it really looked like the girls were flying the films.
But what about
the planes?
Now? What about the theme song? The Hard Ticket. Most of the lyrics are just "Hard Ticket to Hawaii."
Yeah,
but,
it's a little repetitive.
Yeah, but who sings the theme song, and where did that come from?
Oh, I don't remember.
You don't remember?
Who sang it, but no. but it was Gary Stockdale and his partner did two films, and then it kind of got they broke up. It got a little difficult, so we moved on to other people.
But the song was written. It's an original song written for the movie.
Yeah. All the music is original.
Okay.
You can't find it anywhere else.
How much? Can I ask you how much an Andy Sidaris movie cost?
No.
Can I ask you how much it cost to blow up a helicopter?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that because they were all models. In
Yeah, I
fact,
know.
in our living room we have the plane that we used for Savage Beach. There was a storm, and we had with these people. They were rocket scientists, and they did model planes as a hobby. And we used this model plane. It was an absolute copy of a Cessna, and it's hanging in our living room. It's as an art piece, which it is.
What is your favorite movie of the? How many did you make? 12?
Well, I produced 11. I think you can tell the difference about the one that I didn't produce. I like to say that. Which is, it's honest to God, it's like your children. Who can tell which one do you love the most? But I really liked Fit to Kill a lot, and I really liked Return to Savage Beach, which was the last one that we did.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I also remember this. I remember Andy saying that he stopped using Playboy and started using Penthouse because Penthouse had easier rules for the girls. Is that correct?
That is
So
true.
in the
And
later
then we
movies,
went-
you have.
But we also went totally non-union for the last 4 films. Totally.
And so in the later movies, you have Penthouse girls. In the early
Yeah.
movies, you have Playboy girls.
Well, yeah, and there were Playboy women in the last 4.
And then for the hunky guys, for a while,
Yeah.
weren't you using famous
Sports people.
motorcycle guys
Yeah.
and
Bruce
football players?
Penhall was a motorcycle champ, motocross, and then there were the physical, the karate guys and all that. There was one guy who came in for an interview, and he was so good looking that I sent him home with a script, and he came back the next day, and I said, "Well, you're hired." And he said, "How did he read?" I said, "What?"
Well, I think he may have been in this movie. If what are the years we're talking about? 87 for this movie
Yeah.
to how?
Maybe 95, 8, somewhere in there.
So
There's-
more than one movie per year you were doing.
yeah,
Right.
maybe. Yeah, we thought we would do one a year and then take a couple of months off in between, and then we did the last one, and it was the last one.
What was the how long would you work on one movie from pre-production from Andy finishing the script to pre-production to finishing the movie?
I'd say almost a year, but less. But we
Really?
just
How long were you on
barreled
how long were you on location?
through. Oh, 25 days, more or less.
And that's a lot for
For us, it
yeah,
was a
for
lot.
35
yeah,
millimeter
we
film.
worked really hard, but it was fun.
Yeah.
It was challenging, but it was fun. We had a good time.
And I've noticed like a big cult audience develop for these films really over the past 10 years. That's different from that late night cable audience from the 80s and 90s.
The website, the andysidaris.com, I have a feedback form, and I get a lot of mail from people, and there's a new audience, and there are more women than ever before. And now younger people are discovering these films, so it's interesting.
Have you ever had a hard ticket reunion?
No.
Have you ever brought back these casts to appear at one of these events?
No,
That's not interesting to
Actually,
you?
no, it is. It is actually, but there's not very little in Los Angeles. There was one. The first Q&A that I did was in Los Angeles. It was Hard Ticket, and I was up by myself, and I was nervous as hell, and it was just the first time to appear anywhere or to be in a room where Andy wasn't dominating it. So that was interesting. Now there's another one that's coming up. So I will invite. There are a couple of people who still live in Los Angeles. Ava Cadell, who was the she did the on the air person. She had a rate. I don't forget what we call it. Anyway, Ava Cadell, and there are a couple of people. I guess Devin DeVasquez and Ron Moss live in Los Angeles, and I keep in touch with them, and so I will invite them to come along with that. That would be fun.
All of these playmates and hunky guys and motorcycle champions, and do they regard this as are they recognized in shopping malls and today, even today, or?
I guess occasionally, but I don't think they go out in public much. Maybe that's the answer.
All right. Does anyone have any questions from the audience?
I can't
Yes.
see.
Can you tell us what the background story is of the cat in the closing credits?
Oh, that's Yukon King, who was our cat. He was our cat for a very long time. Somebody had thrown him out on our driveway one night, and he became the family cat. So we made him a star. That's it.
Anyone else?
I can't see.
Yes.
Throughout the 12 films, there's always the character Abilene with the last name, the gentleman.
Yeah.
What's the story behind that? Why they keep changing from film to film?
Oh, it's just Abilene because that was Andy made that up for some reason. I forgot to ask him. I don't know. I don't know.
Yes.
Me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, so you talked about where you got the female cast from. Besides the main men, like let's talk about like the sidekicks. Like where'd you source them from? Just normal talent pools, or?
Yeah, we would do casting calls and, mostly non-union. Well, the last 4 films were totally non-union. But we just would do casting calls and friends of friends. And, a lot of guys like to show up for these films, as you can imagine. Yeah, actors on location, they think they're at summer camp.
Yes, in the back.
There's a lot of amazing moments in your films, and some of them are really like out of this world, kind of crazy and improvised. But is there ever a moment where you were like, Andy, this is too far?
Oh, I said that a lot. It didn't matter. I mean, on and off screen. Do you know what I mean?
Did you ever do tests on the films to see where people reacted?
No.
No. Okay. Yes, right here.
I mean, is the method behind the madness sort of what it appears to be, which is just rampant wish fulfillment at 24 frames a second? Like, just doing whatever, basically being untethered from the world of sports and just doing whatever the hell he wanted to do at any given moment?
No, not at any given moment. He was very clear about these films and what he wanted to see on the screen. He just thought that there were action films that were dominated by men, and he said, "What about the girls?" So that was just who he was.
He did it.
Yeah, he liked women. If you saw him directing a football game, he just liked women.
Yes.
I gotta ask, why did the blow-up doll have to die?
I'm sorry, what?
Why did the blow-up doll have to die?
Do you know when we put that in front of the rating board, and they said, "Oh, this is an X film." Why is that? Because they thought that the blow-up doll looked too real. Huh?
Yes, in the back.
What did Andy like to watch? What were his kind of favorite films?
The Wild Bunch was his favorite film. Yeah.
And he liked James Bond a lot, right?
Oh yes. Oh yes. And Warner Brothers promotes these films as James Bond meets Baywatch. So I like that.
And he was, wouldn't he? I mean, I don't know if he was putting me on or not, but he wrote these scripts in about a week, right?
Well, yes, he did, but he thought about them for a week and a half.
But he had an instinctive wisdom about screenwriting. I've never heard anybody say I was bored by an Andy Sidaris film, and the secret to action films, I think, even if it's a big budget action film, is large cast of characters, many locations, and many subplots. And Andy had all of those things, just as many as James Bond did.
Absolutely. He'd say, if you don't like this scene, wait 10 seconds. And you'll be someplace else.
Right. Anyone else?
No? Okay.
Well, Arlene, thank you very much. And
Thank you so much. Thank you.
thank you guys for coming out on a Monday night to see a 1987 film. That's 30th anniversary film.
Is it 30? No.
Well, you made it in 87, right? I think you came out
Oh
in
my God.
88. Yeah.
How time flies. Yeah.
And come back and bring Fit to Kill.
Yes. Love to. Love to do that. Thank you. Thank you
All right.
so much.